Do as you wish.
We're running.
It's all.
We're running. So, Darlene, you want to tell me where you were born and raised?
I was born on the farm in a little bedroom in Moore County,
Okay, just south of Blooming Prairie.
just
huh?
south of Blooming Prairie,
About
and
4
I was your sister.
Well, we don't have to rub it in. Where'd you go to grade school then?
I went to the Berg School, District 111, Joint, right?
That's right.
Which is 1 mile from home, and you used to make me walk up the hill before you give me a ride on my bicycle.
That had something to do with lead, but let's not get in that subject.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. So where'd you go to? How many? Remember the names of the kids in your class?
Yes, Dale Hansen,
Just one kid.
just one kid.
How many kids in the school?
24, usually.
For all 8 grades.
Right.
Remember the teachers you had?
Yes, I started with Muriel Anderson. I remember she let me sit on her lap and drive the car home once when she was coming back to Mission Circle for lunch. We had Gloria Anderson,
Muriel's sister.
Muriel's sister, and Mrs. Tucker.
Mrs. Tucker.
She was an excellent teacher.
Um,
Tall, thin, gray-haired, very gray-haired lady.
Didn't we have Mrs. Kotleva fill in one time for?
Oh, probably.
Yeah,
And we
yeah. She was
had
an excellent teacher.
Mrs.
too.
Phipps also filled in.
Were you in school when? What was that? What was the name of the heavyset gal that was practice teaching that time? With the fur coat.
I don't remember her.
Oh, she got on the merry-go-round and we spun her off in the mud in the spring with her fur coat on.
I don't remember that.
You don't remember?
No.
Mrs. Kusniska. Yeah.
Oh. Okay.
Where'd you go to high school?
Blooming Prairie.
How big a high school was that then?
Well, there were 52 in our graduating class, so I imagine there were a couple hundred people.
Did you ride the bus?
A lot of the time. But sometimes I rode with you and we'd get late. So I think I rode the bus most of the time.
Yeah.
I know every day I had to shower first, and I'd always go to school, get on the bus with wet hair.
Do you want to give us the same type of a rundown on you, Bob?
Well, I don't know that it's a matter of my wanting to or not. I think it's mostly what you expect.
Yeah. Well, you don't get paid if you don't do a good job.
I suppose not. Well, let's see. I was born in what was called a birthing house, I believe, in Cresco, Iowa. I think I was the first to be born in someplace other than our home place. I went to a 8th grade country school, just like Darlene did. It was called East York School in Fillmore Township, Minnesota. Ours wasn't a big school like yours. I don't think we had more than 12 or 14 at the most. And I don't think I ever had a classmate. At least I don't remember any. I think I was probably pretty much alone in each grade that I had. Everyone remembers their first grade teacher, and I do too. I think that all of my teachers were graduates of the normal school, which meant they'd gone to a school for 6 weeks, maybe 2 months, after high school, whereupon they were certified to teach in one-room schools. And I would say for the most part they did a remarkably good job. I remember my first grade teacher's name. It was Miss Testrote. T-E, capital S-T-R-O-E-T-E.
First graders had to write that?
I'm sorry?
Did first graders have to write her name?
I don't remember if I had to write it or not, but I certainly remember it.
Yeah.
I had other teachers. One of the most memorable times was in the midst of World War II. Our teacher was a young woman named Eva Jane Surfling. I think she was probably about 18 or 19 years old. I think it was her first year of teaching after normal school. She had a brother who was in the Army. And one morning, the rural mail carrier, whose name was Bert Thomas, his route didn't ordinarily take him by the school, but he unexpectedly arrived at the school that morning and asked our teacher to come out to the entryway, sometimes called the cloakroom. And we didn't hear what he told her, but she came back into the school crying because he had told her that her brother had been killed. And it was a terribly tragic time, not just for her, but for all the kids in the school. He wasn't the first person that we knew of who had been killed, but it came very close to home. So that takes me, I think, up to high school. Oh, I have to cover that too. Well, I went to Harmony High School, and again, it wasn't a big school like yours was. I think there were 33 in my class that graduated, so I suppose that the total enrollment was 130 or thereabouts, something like that. And it was a pretty good time. World War II ended in 1945, which was my freshman year in high school. And of course the victory over Japan came later that year in the summertime. And so the remaining years were spent relatively worry-free because most all the servicemen had come home, some didn't. But it was a time of peace and generally of prosperity for the farmers of the time. So that brings me up to date.
Okay, remember when you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Oh, I certainly do. It was a Sunday afternoon, and my dad was giving me a haircut, which he always did. And I never enjoyed those haircuts much because the old hand clippers that were used didn't work like the electric clippers, and they'd always pull, and it was a terrible
You squeeze and pull.
Right. Yeah, my dad would forget to let go before he pulled the clippers out, and it hurt like the devil. At least it did when I was that age. And I recall that the news came over the radio as I was in the midst of my haircut, announcing the raid on Pearl Harbor, and of course I had no idea what or where Pearl Harbor was, but that was soon made clear to us by the radio announcer.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very solemn occasion.
Do you remember hearing about it, Darlene?
Yes. I was just laughing now. Do you remember the tablecloths that everyone had on their tables? There were oilcloths with the map so you could see where the war was taking place.
No, I don't remember that.
Now, we had one on our kitchen table. It was a map of Europe. And we would get the news daily and hear where the battles were being fought and could usually locate them on the map. It was a lesson in geography, probably better than anything I had in school.
Sure.
I was thinking the other thing, you were talking about the teachers going to normal school. Mom went to normal. She got her teacher's training that way. So did Raymond and Joyce.
Yep. Did you remember one of the Hanson girls? Who was it? Doris Hanson? The Monday after Pearl Harbor, she went home, which was just a short distance, to listen to the Roosevelt speech and come back and give a report on it in school.
Vaguely.
Yeah. Okay, so where'd you go to college, Darlene?
I went to Luther College. And I guess when I started, I intended just to go 2 years. And I took business courses, but I liked it there. And I was never going to be a teacher, but of course that's what I ended up being. And I finished in 3 years because I went to summer school. So I got out in 1955, and we're celebrating my 50th reunion this year.
You know, we kind of skipped over something. Neither one of you told anything about your mother and father and your family, your brothers and sisters. Why don't you go back and start over? Start with that, Darlene.
Well, I was the youngest of 9, and I always heard that Mildred had a date that night, and they kept waiting for me to be born, and I wasn't born until 10 o'clock, and I weighed 11 3/4 pounds.
I thought you said 9 3/4.
11.
11 3/4?
It's like when you shoot a turkey or catch a fish, it gets bigger every year.
No, isn't that right? And then I had this brother that was 2 years older than me,
The handsome one.
named Francis. I'm not hearing some static there. And then Richard, and then Joyce, and Hiram, and Rama, Marion, Bernice, and Mildred. There were 9 of us. And then Mom and Dad, of course.
Remember anything about Mom?
I remember a lot of things about Mom. She was a very wonderful person. She was a very hard worker. She never complained. She worked all the time. And I think she could do everything. I remember once when we were babysitting Kay and Kathleen. They were dropped off over there, and Mary and Gladys didn't have any money, and Kathleen was in a ragged dress. And so Mom just got some material out and cut a dress out with no pattern and sewed it together. So Kathleen went home with a clean dress on with no holes in.
Do you remember when Richard got hurt?
Very much, yes. I think Mom carried him home from the field. I remember seeing her sitting with him, holding him, and was so worried and scared.
He must have weighed 75, 80 pounds, and she didn't weigh more than 120 or 30, and she carried him almost a quarter of a mile.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. He was all dirty.
He fell off a horse,
Yeah, and he had a big gash or a hoof mark.
Apparently got dragged,
in his head. I suppose he still has that scar.
So right now, Mildred and Marion are gone.
And Gladys.
And Gladys, that's Marion's wife.
I talked to Gladys a couple weeks ago before she got real bad, and I said I remembered her so fondly when they moved into our house, and I said I was 5 years old, and she said, well, I wasn't a whole lot older. We were both kids. Of course, then they had Kay, and I grew up with Kay. She was like my little sister, I guess.
Remember your family, or you want to do the same scenario, Bob?
Sure. My father and my mother both grew up in Bristol Township, Minnesota, Fillmore County, within a few miles of each other. They didn't attend the same schools. My father was he worked at quite a few different jobs. He was a drayman. Most people probably don't know what a drayman was anymore, but basically he drove a team for the dray works, which was a way of delivering things in small towns. He I don't know if he ever finished 8th grade for sure, but he was a very bright man. It's too bad he didn't have an education. When he was, I guess, 20 years old, his parents moved from Minnesota to Saskatchewan, Canada, near a little hamlet named Bangor, Saskatchewan. He and his older brother Len did not go with the family, and so from then on he was pretty much on his own. He served in World War I. Not very long, I think he contracted one of the epidemic diseases that was rampant in 1917 and 1918, and I think spent most of his military career in the hospital in Fort Snelling. My mother graduated from high school in Lyle, Minnesota. In those days, there was no way for farm kids to go to high school unless you lived in the town where the high school was. No buses. Nobody could afford to take their kids to school because there was too much work to do on the farm, and probably would have had to pay tuition to do so, and most of them couldn't afford it. So she was fortunate in that her elder sister was the principal at Lyle, Minnesota. And so she went to high school while her sister was there. And she married my father, who worked for a year or so as a fireman on a Milwaukee Railroad locomotive. He was on the run from Austin, Minnesota to Kelmer, Iowa. And in those days, they didn't even have stokers in the locomotives, and the firemen actually shoveled the coal by hand from the tender immediately to the rear of the locomotive and into the firebox. And as a consequence, he had shoulders and arms that belied his relatively small stature. He's a very strong man. They were married in Austin, Minnesota in 1919, and shortly after that moved to the farm where I grew up in York Township, Fillmore County, Minnesota.
Do you remember your first car, or the first cars you remember?
That my folks had?
Yeah.
I think I remember a 1928 Chevrolet that they had. I was too young to drive then. But,
No kidding.
yeah, well, I started driving pretty young. We got a 1936 Chevrolet Master Deluxe in 1937. And that's the car I learned to drive on. I recall I was probably driving when I was 10 years old. I was too short to see over the windshield, so I would have to prop myself on the door handle on the left-hand side of the driver's seat so I could see up over the windshield. It was kind of an exploratory way of driving. Those were the first cars I remember.
What about the tractors? Or did you use horses on the farm at first?
Well, when I was growing up, we still had horses on the farm. We had a McCormick Deering 1020 tractor, which was just about close to worthless.
Yeah.
Steel wheels, of course. The only thing it could be used for basically was plowing, and it didn't do a very good job of pulling a two-bottom plow.
Yeah.
Didn't have very much power, and I don't think I ever drove that one because we probably got rid of it when I was 9 years old or so and got a Alice Chalmers WC
Yep.
row crop tractor,
Yep.
which was a real bear to drive because the clutch, you practically had to use 2 feet to push the clutch in. And my dad had to weld an extension onto the clutch so I could use it with my left foot and drive the tractor.
I remember the first trip I took, and Bernice was with me, and Mom and Papa. We drove to Orfordville, Wisconsin, to visit Aunt Barbara. And I believe her husband was Olaf. And I was so afraid when we went over the Mississippi River. That bridge rattled and I cried.
She does the same thing today.
I do not. And we got there so late at night, and I don't think they knew we were coming.
Remember Olaf came out on the porch in his nightgown?
His nightshirt, yes.